Okay, it is 6 o'clock. I think we're getting ready to get started. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is 6 o'clock. Megan, would you call the roll, please?
Rodriguez, Storr, Straub,
Present.
Summers, Taylor,
Here.
Thorsland,
Here.
Wolken, Carter, Cowart,
Present.
Esri,
Here.
Furtado, Goss,
Here.
Harper, King,
Here.
Lokshin,
Here.
McGuire, Michaels,
Present.
Pasalakwa,
Here.
Paul, Patterson.
Here.
Okay, we'll move forward then. Can I get approval of the agenda? Thank you. Ms. Cowart, second. Ms. Lakshin? Okay, discussion on the agenda, or we're good with it? All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on now to the budget presentation. Tammy's here again tonight, having taken a lot of rest and water, and is ready to talk again for the next hour about the next items on the budget.
Am I limited to an hour? Is that what you're saying? Okay, good evening. Just a couple of reminders about the slides. The numbers that you see in the upper right-hand corner for revenue and expenditure for fiscal year 21 and 22 are based on the original 2021 budget and the proposed 2022 budget. And just a reminder again, fund balances for fiscal year 2020 are unaudited, so if there are adjustments and corrections made to those through the audit process, they will carry through to fiscal year 21 and 22. We're going to start off tonight with the GIS Consortium, and we have Director Leanne Brehab-Riley here, if you would stand. For GIS Consortium, the membership fee increases in fiscal year 22 are 2.5%. There are additional appropriations in the 22 budget for an anticipated retirement, and so that is what is making up the revenue to expenditure shortage. The anticipated fund balance at the end of fiscal year 22 is exceeding the balance goal of 25% of the operating budget. Capital purchases that are appropriated in fiscal year 2022 are based on the 5-year capital plan for technology, and that appropriation is $83,125. And the next ortho photography year is next year, or I'm sorry, 2023. Again, I'll pause briefly after each budget. If you have questions, please let County Executive Kleppel know so we can answer those. Our next budget is the GIS Fund, and this fund pays for the county's contributions for the fees that I mentioned related to GIS Consortium, and also for some of the mapping software licenses for county departments. Revenues for this fund come from documents that are filed in the Recorder's Office, and in fiscal year 2021, revenue is expected to be greater than what's in the budget, and just like you heard last night, that is due to strong real estate market in fiscal year 2021.
Okay, no questions for Leanne. Thanks, Leanne.
The Children's Advocacy Center, or CAC, is our next budget, and Executive Director Carrie May is here. CAC received a one-time increase of $22,000 for equipment and supplies in state fiscal year 2021, And their grant funders, however, are not allowing for increases in fiscal year 2022. So at this time, there are no wage increases built into the budget for CAC staff in fiscal year 2022. The CAC is working closely with the circuit clerk. I mentioned this last night to ensure that the department is receiving the correct amount of revenue that should be attributed to them. This revenue was implemented with a CTAA, and it has been very nominal up until this point. In fact, quite a bit less than what we were expecting. So we do know that the waivers, the CTAA waivers apply, and we also know that there is a prioritization for distribution of the fees that are collected. But hopefully, in working with the circuit clerk's office, we can ensure that CAC is getting all of the funds that they are supposed to receive. And if there are additional funds that will be coming to them, they could use those to implement wage increases. However, you'll hear later tonight that Carrie has requested funds through ARPA for a wage increase to their staff as well. And that CTAA fee is a $10 fee that applies to certain convictions. I can't tell you what they are off the top of my head. For the Board of Health budget, we have 3 representatives here tonight. We have Krista Jones, who is the board chair, and Julie Pride, who is the administrator of CUPHD, and Kathy Emanuel, who is the treasurer of the Board of Health. You also have a replacement budget on your desk. At the Board of Health meeting on August 17th, the board voted to make a change to the budget, so this replacement reflects that change, and that is a change of an additional $250,000 in fiscal year 2022. That would come from fund balance in the event that there are not additional funds provided for COVID-19. So we know that in fiscal year 2021, there was a significant amount of grant funding, and also in fiscal year 2020, but at this time, there have not been any funds identified for fiscal year 22. So the Board of Health is being proactive and asking for the additional appropriation if needed in fiscal year 22. And per the board's direction, that draw on the $250,000 would have to be approved by the county board chair, or I'm sorry, the county Board of Health chair. The Board of Health is also funded through a property tax levy, and the increase in the levy is 3.6% in fiscal year 2022. That is then split between CUPHD and the Board of Health based on the EAV that is provided by the county clerk's office in April of that year. So we don't know what that split looks like at the time that we prepare the budget. The fiscal year 22 budget is basically prepared with the same split that we used in fiscal year 2021 at this point. However, once we receive those final numbers, we will recalculate and we will distribute the levy based on that calculation. Also included in the fiscal year 22 budget is $50,000 for one-time services to be identified by the Board of Health, and $15,000 for emergencies that might arise, also requiring authorization of the Board of Health chair.
Ms. Furtado.
With that revised budget, where does it leave their fund balance at the end of 2025? It looks like it's still within their target range. Is that accurate?
No, it will drop below the 25%.
Okay.
I calculated that at 11.3%.
Okay.
And I know the Board of Health had some discussion
okay.
about that at the meeting, and there was a level of comfortability with going ahead and asking for that draw on fund balance because of COVID-19 being, one of those things that you would potentially use fund balance for.
Would an alternative solution be to fund it out of ARPA?
Well, I don't know for certain that there would actually be a draw
Okay.
necessary. I think that could be something that you could consider. It would be an allowable expense for sure if you wanted to go ahead and appropriate it and have it available if needed, if additional grant funding was not available.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the highway funds, and we have County Engineer Jeff Blue tonight. We'll start with the county highway operating budget. Within this budget, there is a $400,000 appropriation for heavy equipment, also receipt of DCEO grant for a drainage project on Wilbur Avenue, and a $116,000 transfer to the highway capital budget. This capital budget was implemented a few years ago in order to act as a sinking fund for the highway department to be able to reserve funds for necessary repairs for the highway buildings. So the fund balance of $2.6 million at the end of fiscal year 2022 includes capital funds that are reserved in the amount of $420,000. The roof at the highway department is being replaced this year with insurance funds, and in fiscal year 22, we have also included a $100,000 appropriation in the capital budget for any unforeseen issues that may arise, although there are no large-scale highway projects that are scheduled for the buildings. The County Bridge Fund is a levy fund, and there are several bridge projects scheduled for fiscal year 22. You can see those listed here. Also, there are some smaller township culvert projects scheduled. For the county motor fuel tax, there are no large projects scheduled for next year, and that's predominantly because the rebuild funds are being used because those are going to expire in 2025. County motor fuel tax does have $1 million budgeted in the road and bridge maintenance line, and you can see the fund balance for the motor fuel tax fund is anticipated to be pretty significant. At the end of 22, $8 million. So once we finish expending the rebuild funds, then we will have this funding available for projects. The Highway Federal Aid Matching Fund is a levy fund also, and there is an update to this budget since you received your packet. In fiscal year 2021, the county board approved budget amendment for about $345,000, and that was for a payment to the state. So you don't see that in the fiscal year 2021 revenue, but it is in the fiscal year 2021 projections. It's been added to the fiscal year 21 projections, bringing the estimated expenditures in 2021 to $372,000. So the fund balance that's reflected in your budget sheets of $865,000 should actually be changed to $520,214. The purpose of this fund is to build up the fund balance and to be able to use that fund balance to match funds for projects awarded through the Federal Highway Administration Fund. The last highway budget is the Idot rebuild grant, and this is the grant that I mentioned earlier. Total funds allocated to Champaign County are just under $5.8 million, and I believe fiscal year 2022 is the last year that we'll receive revenue. Is that correct, Jeff? For these grant funds. The expenditures have to be used for capital transportation projects with a minimum of a 13-year life. There's $3 million budgeted for next year to recycle and overlay County Road 20, and a $1.3 million to reconstruct a bridge on County Road 32 south of Gifford.
Thanks, Jeff.
Our next budget is animal control. There are actually 3 budgets, but I just prepared a summary slide for those budgets. In 2021, the county board approved the addition of an assistant director position for animal control. That is also funded in fiscal year 22. In 2020, there was a restructure of registration fees that has generated additional revenue for animal control to be used for capital and operations. There is a revenue to expenditure deficit in fiscal year 22, and that draw on fund balance is for the planned purchase of shelter software. You heard last night, animal control still has software on the AS400, and also for the replacement of a vehicle. For the Mental Health Board, we have the Executive Director, Lynn Canfield, here tonight in the back. The Mental Health Board is a levy fund, and some of the highlights that Lynn has provided for us tonight are that there is a focus on crisis response and trauma-informed care, especially for survivors of the global health pandemic and increased violence. The department has made efforts to expand their virtual options and providing resource information and anti-stigma efforts. You approved a budget amendment a couple of months ago for Arp funds to be distributed to the Mental Health Board. So those were reseated in fiscal year 2021 in the Mental Health Board budget, and half of that amount is appropriated in fiscal year 2022. And those funds, per Lynn, will be used to provide additional revenue and expand the range of services locally. The Developmental Disabilities Board is also a levy fund, and each year there are fewer service organizations throughout the state and the nation that are providing these services. So strengthening and stabilizing this workforce is crucial. Training workshops are offered at no cost to participants with CEUs on topics of importance to the field, such as impacts of trauma. And in the 22 budget, there is $395,000 that's budgeted as a transfer from the DD board to the Mental Health Board to contribute to the administrative cost share between the boards. And the last budget for this department is the Cilla facilities budget. These houses are paid off and were recently appraised. And the budget was prepared to assume that there will be no rental revenue, but it does cover the cost of occupied or vacant houses. The project serves people with complex behavioral and disability support needs who often don't have other resources. And this project's future is under discussion, particularly regarding how to best support Champaign County residents who have these complex care needs.
Thank you, Lynn.
Stephanie, Ms. Furtado has a question.
Just really quick, you said that the ARPA fund, half of it was budgeted in 2022. I'm not seeing that, so
It's in the grants and contributions line. So it's included in the grants and contributions line. Let's see, I gotta get there.
sorry.
Contributions and grants. I said it backwards. 53392. Is that correct, Lynn?
Can we have her come up? I'm sorry, can we have her come up and answer some questions?
Yeah,
Lynn,
Lynn,
can
do
you
you want
please
to
come
come up
up?
to the microphone here?
Oh, I see. Okay. So it's only appropriated under expenditures, not under revenue for 2022?
So the revenue, you
Was
can
it-
see in line 37129.
I did see that, yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay.
half of the expenditure was budgeted in
Okay.
fiscal year 2021 and half in '22.
Thanks. Sorry. I just, when I was looking at it before, I had a hard time following it. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Actually, Stephanie, I think it's a good question, so we can better understand how the ARPA fund might flow through mental health. I assume we had those 4 programs that got funded. Or what are the expectation or needs that we might see? And would we fund it the same way if we used ARPA funds? What programs? I see you at home. I see Martin Center. Those types of things that are going to be new or growing. How can we assist those, and how will that process work? Does that make sense?
That does make sense. But we have, we've never received applications from them. And I think because Martin Center is a park district, isn't it primarily park district? I'm not sure that we would be able to fund them under the rules that govern us, but we could certainly fund See You at Home, but they have never made a request for funding. So it's, so the ARPA funding right now is set to fund 9 programs for the period of July 1st of this year through June 30th of next year. And after, I'm not asking for ARPA funding beyond that, because hopefully the state will have some real funding opportunities that we can take advantage of locally. I'm working on that right now with officials from the state. It is very hard to guarantee that any new money from the state flows to Champaign County. So, and then again, we have this huge problem of where is the workforce. So even if the state has a really attractive opportunity, we might not have agencies that can take advantage of it. So organizations like See You at Home, which are doing really important work in this community, might fill a space like that, and we might encourage them to apply for funding from us. They have to agree to a whole lot of requirements that, they might not like. There's a lot of reporting attached to this. So I think that turns some organizations off.
We have someone from RPC there, I think now, healthcare consumers. Is there a caseworker, mental health support now? At See You at Home?
We're not funding anyone there. Are you saying the RPC might have someone there? That's totally possible. Like the RPC has case managers in great places, and we do fund some of those. So if one of those is spending some time at See You at Home, that'd be appropriate and fantastic. I'm not sure if that's Delitzo is there.
Yeah, that would be a question, Jim. Wait till Delitzo comes up, and we can ask him.
That's a great
And
place.
I will say, actually, my Rotary Club today had Rob Dahlhaus speak. He said that they don't need money right now, although they still are going to do their fundraiser this year. That's not the main need they have is for a workforce. They don't have people to work.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Lynn.
Okay, and our next budgets will be presented by RPC. We have Chief Executive Officer Delitzo Solomoya here, and also Chris Ward.
Good evening. Name again is Delitzo Solomoyo, Chief Executive Officer with the Champaign County Regional Planning Commission. I'm here this evening with Chris Ward, who's our fiscal manager, and she's going to make sure that I don't fumble as I present this budget to you this evening. Thank you for the opportunity. For FY 2022, the proposed budget total revenue for FY 2022, sorry, my glasses are fogging up, $48,427,561. You can see the comparison with what we presented to you, which is the current budget for FY 2021. Total expenditures for FY 2022 is $48,222,792. Our budget, our total budget that we're presenting to you accommodates 5 funds. These include more than 100 grants and in focusing in 8 program areas. Majority of our funding at the Regional Planning Commission are federal and state grants, so that constitutes about 90% of our budget. We are anticipating a staffing level increase of 10 FTEs. And again, this is something I highlight every year. The administrative costs that we have is less than 7.8% of the agency's overall budget. The federal government allows you up to 15% in administrative costs, and I think the state goes up to about 19%. And so we're very proud of the fact that we keep our administrative costs at less than 7.8%. So I'm going to go into highlighting the specific funds, beginning with Fund 075, which is our general operating fund. With this fund, the proposed revenue is $30,219,000. If we compare that to last year, what we presented to you, that was $16 million. Expenditures of $30 million, 111,742, and then comparing that to last year, as you can see. We're anticipating sustained growth potential in our FY22, primarily due to the recovery efforts, which I highlighted, I think, in your meeting last week. Something else I want to highlight as well, as you can see, the budgeted fund balance is $8,221,221. And that primarily consists of the advance funding that we received for the emergency rental assistance. Typically, with the grants that we administer at the Regional Planning Commission, we have to incur the expenditures and then submit those to our funding sources to be reimbursed. But with the emergency rental assistance program, which is funded through the U.S. Department of Treasury, those funds were advanced to us, and so that's the reason why we have that high restricted budgeted fund balance of $8 million. Some of the initiatives, again, besides the rental assistance in this fund will include our planning activities, developmental disabilities program. A lot of our social services are in this fund, as well as many of our energy efficiency and energy assistance programs that we operate at the Regional Planning Commission. Staffing level increases will be proportionate to the grant funding, as well as the planned outcomes. Again, the administrative expenses represent less than 7.8% of the operating budget. Moving on to the next fund. The next fund is our Fund 104, which is our Early Childhood Fund. This is where we have our Head Start program, as well as the other funding that we receive from the state of Illinois to serve our children and families with early education. Revenues for FY 2022, $13 million, 52,400. You can see the comparison with what we are in our FY 21 current budget. Expenditures of $13,200,250. The budgeted fund balance there is $1.3 million. And without the explanation of that fund balance is that we are anticipating a slight increase due to continued loss of full-day subsidy reimbursement. Some of the programming that we operate in our early childhood program, we get reimbursed, and because of the pandemic, that has impacted our ability to capture some of those reimbursements. And so this fund balance will help to cover some of those fund losses that we have experienced due to the pandemic. But our funded enrollment from the federal government is 666 infants and toddlers and families. And it includes enhanced center-based and virtual learning platforms responsive to the recovery effort. As I highlighted last week, we have, I think, done a tremendous job with this program to serve our children and families during these very difficult conditions. But most of our children now are attending classes on site as opposed to what we were doing part of last year in providing some of that virtually. It includes sustained efforts to incorporate other approaches to effective child and family service delivery while preventing transmission of COVID-19. Moving on to the next fund, Fund 110, which is our Workforce Development Fund. With this fund, the budgeted revenues of $4,529,954, with expenditures of $4,635,300. We have a negative budgeted fund balance of $155,704. That negative fund balance has to do with timing of federal funds that are passed through to the state of Illinois. We typically operate multiple programs within this fund, and these are 2-year programs, and so we anticipate full recovery of the negative balance by the end of each 2-year fund formula grant term. So we anticipate that we will get reimbursed by the state of Illinois by the time these grants come to an end. But this program or this fund includes us supporting our businesses as well as job seekers in a 5-county area, and additional recovery funds again anticipated in FY 2022 to ensure that the public workforce system is responsive to private sector needs for reskilling and upskilling the local workforce. Moving on to the next fund, which is our Fund 475, and that's our Economic Development Fund. The revenues for this fund are $610,500 and expenditures of $233,500, with a budgeted fund balance of $7,726,761. And again, this is a restricted fund balance, which includes any loan receivables that we have that we've loaned out to businesses. It accommodates restricted revolving portfolio with proportionate job creation. So as we get loans repaid back to us, those can get reloaned out to businesses for further job creation. And then again, we hope to with this fund to improve economic conditions and expecting to generate some loan demands hopefully in FY 2022. The last fund to present to you tonight is our Fund 474, which is our USDA loan fund, also known as the Intermediary Revolving Loan Program. And the revenues for this fund for FY 2022 would be $15,000. So everything is pretty much similar to what we presented for FY 2021, which is the current budget, and then the budgeted fund balance of $846,953. This program allows us to provide low-interest loans to rural areas with populations of less than 25,000. And I think the last one we did was in the village of Royal, where they've actually been able to provide some wastewater system in their downtown area, and I think that will help to generate some businesses in the downtown area. But it includes estimated disbursement of $150,000 in new public entity loan financing in FY 2022. A couple things before I close that I wanted to highlight for you in terms of in the binder that has been presented to you. There's a memo addressed to the county board whereby we highlight some of the funds that we are receiving directly from the county, from the various entities within the county to support some of the programming that the Regional Planning Commission provides. So we have membership services at $20,903. We have funding from the Highway Department, which I know that was just presented earlier, in the amount of $33,545. And then we have other funds to assist with the Youth Assessment Center, some of the court diversion as well as justice diversion initiatives that we're engaged in with the Sheriff's Office, the Village of Rantoul, and pretty much those two entities. That pretty much concludes our presentation in terms of what we're anticipating for our FY 2022 budget.
Ms. Michaels?
Greetings. I'm not sure that I heard you correctly. I thought maybe you said that we were not reimbursed for some of the early Head Start because of the pandemic?
Yeah,
And this-
so,
Yeah.
yes, thank you for the question. So some of the funding that we receive through the state of Illinois, we get reimbursed, and I think it's for us to be able to offer full-day programming to our children and families. So, you know, they can either go to, the parents can either go to work or be able to attend continued education. But due to the fact that we were partially closed last year due to the pandemic, so when the governor issued the stay-at-home order, I think in March, that essentially meant, you know, all daycare and early childhood education facilities had to do the same. And so we were not operating on site, and so that impacted our ability to be reimbursed. But we have received other funds from the federal government and so forth, but the losses in funding from those reimbursements, you know, we haven't been able to recoup all of those losses. It allows us to be able to have 3 individuals in a classroom, so 2 teachers and an aide, and so, you know, that allows us to provide quality education for our children. But that's the reason why we've experienced those losses.
Just follow up here. I know that sometimes too, early Head Start and Head Start would go to the homes at times, and I wonder if that has started back up, because I know that actually helps some people too, or is that still something that's kind of on the back burner that maybe you'll receive funds for later on?
No, we still continue to provide home visiting. That's part of our program option. So we either provide center-based programming, as well as for those families that do not want to partake in the center-based programming, we do the home visiting. So that program option is still in place.
Ms. Carter?
So I just would like to just put my 2 cents in on the loan for the small businesses, something that helped me. Well, first I'll say that it was definitely pointed out to me during the loan process that this is money that's borrowed, and so that they want you to pay it back, because when you make those payments back, then that allows other small businesses to come in and actually loan off that money too. So that was something very unique that I thought about the program, which was great for a small business owner. Also, it doesn't say, like, how many right now, like, would you say you have pending, or not pending, revolving loans for small businesses? There isn't a number. It's like, how many businesses can you say, like, within the last year have you lent to small businesses?
So I would say that the demand for our loan program has not been as high as it has been in the past years. Okay. And typically, we don't loan 100% to a small business. Either a bank, you know, may have a first position on a loan. But in terms of number of businesses that we provided loans to, I'd have to get back to the county board on that. I just don't have that in front of me.
Thank you. I think the breakdown was like 51-49. So the bank, you have your first option as far as, like, well, you have 2 options to get your funding, and the bank is always number 1 on the loan, and then the regional planning helps with the 49%, if I remember correctly.
That's
but
correct.
Definitely a beneficial program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Patterson.
For the USDA loan fund, it mentioned that it's loans in rural areas, the population of less than 25,000. How do they measure area?
Ooh.
Like, is that like a village or township?
Yeah. So municipality, any you know, it could be a municipality, it could be a village, but I think it's all based on the population size.
Okay. And also, can you speak to how your workforce situation has been as far as your own staffing levels? And are there any areas where you're seeing more of a shortfall in staffing?
Yeah, so definitely staffing has been a challenge, I think, for a lot of organizations, including the RPC, and just the ability for us to attract talent for the various programs and services that, particularly the ones that we're providing during this pandemic. It's been very challenging. We advertise, and sometimes folks will not show up for interviews, or if they do, it's not really quite the right fit. So it has been a challenge. It's been a challenge. I know, just talking to my colleagues, throughout the state, we're all experiencing the same issues. And we're trying to figure out different ways to either incentivize or to be able to think outside the box to attract talent into the organization. So.
Okay, thank you, Delitza. Did you want to ask a question, Jim? I know you said something earlier. Sure.
I think actually Stephanie asked this question before, and it's that list of items for the county budget, and that court diversion drops down to $53,000 in the middle of the year. You see that? Are we going to have to continue that in the budget to support the funding for that?
In my understanding, and maybe Chris will rescue me on this, but my understanding with that particular line is that the funding that we get from the Mental Health Board goes up to June of next year. And so for purposes of ensuring that we're able to continue to provide the, I think it's court diversion services in the sheriff's office, funds were set aside, ARPA funding was set aside through the Mental Health Board, just in case if we don't get the funding from the Mental Health Board, that we would be covered. But my understanding was that this was worked out as pretty much almost as a set-aside fund.
Okay, thanks.
I think in answer to your question, Jim, is wasn't it part of that $770,000 that the board approved already to the Mental Health Board? It was already written into that, I think. Go ahead, Lisa. Or Lynn, do you want to come on up and talk at the mic?
You're correct.
All right. Any other questions of Delitzo? Ms. Lakshan?
Actually, this may be a question for you, Darlene. I can't remember, is RPC included within that, the workforce salary study?
I'm sorry, I can't understand the question.
Is the RPC included in our workforce salary, the $200,000 that was budgeted to do a study of compensation for
That was
county
in your
employees?
first memo from me that had the tables.
Yeah, I just can't remember.
Part
if-
of it, yeah, one side was with RPC and the other side was just RPC. So with, you could add them together. If you wanted to include RPC, you could add those together.
No,
In the first memo that we sent.
that's not what she's asking.
I'm sorry.
She's asking about the salary study you're going to do.
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, RPC is not included. They do their own personnel and salary and stuff themselves. And they do have somebody come and do studies for them periodically.
Thank you.
Okay, our next budget is the Courts Construction Fund. This fund was created in 1999 as a capital project fund for the construction and remodeling of the courthouse and addition, and we've been spending down the remainder of this fund balance. It is expected that we will have spent down the entire fund balance in fiscal year 22. The appropriation in fiscal year 22 reflects the remaining balance of the fund. We last used this fund in fiscal year 2020 to pay for a portion of the video security and surveillance system at the courthouse. The Courthouse Museum Fund is established to maintain the museum area with a focus on Abraham Lincoln that is in the courthouse, and decisions regarding the projects to be funded are made by the Lincoln Legacy Committee. There are no specific expenditures budgeted for fiscal year 22. This first slide is in regards to public safety sales tax revenue. One thing I want to point out, I don't know if you get tired of hearing it or not, but the state is still collecting the 1.5% collection fee year to date. That has directed $323,000 away from the county. Some good news, though, that the state implemented is what you've heard me talk about already, is the level the playing field legislation, which has enhanced revenue fairly significantly. So at this point in the fiscal year, we generally have received 49 to 50% of our revenues, and what that looks like for projections through the end of the year is that we'll be bringing in about $5.56 million in public safety sales tax revenue. Just to give you an idea of what that looks like compared to the last two fiscal years, that's a 26% increase compared to fiscal year 2020, which we know revenues were down because of the pandemic. However, it's a 14% increase still when compared to the 2019 budget. As the budget is prepared right now, there is a budget surplus of $977,000. We are going to just suggest that some possible uses for this would be potentially appropriating for out-of-county boarding if that is still determined to be necessary next fiscal year, or this appropriation could also be added to the $3.75 million that I mentioned last night that's being transferred from the general fund to the capital fund for needs to be determined by the county board, such as potential replacement of the justice management system, or also to go towards potential planning for the consolidation of the jails. For expenditures in fiscal year 2022, 43% of the tax revenue will go to pay for debt service. Also budgeted are several programs. The Youth Assessment Center, which RPC mentioned earlier, it receives 5% of public safety sales tax revenues, and that's a $278,750. The reentry program is budgeted. I know that contract ends at the end of this year, but there is an appropriation if that contract is extended for fiscal year 2022. The jail classification system, funding for the lieutenant that oversees that system is paid from public safety sales tax funds, as well as the utilities and some minor maintenance cost of the public safety buildings. Also, justice system technology is funded with public safety sales tax revenues. So for fiscal year 22, there is both current and reserve funding that's going to the capital from public safety sales tax. Also, something that we've included in the budget is funding to study the potential replacement of the justice management system, otherwise known as JANO. We did speak with all of the elected officials and department heads that are using that system or using systems that are interrelated with that system, and we had unanimous support that we would move forward with a study of the current system and also look at what the needs of the county are.
Mr. Goss?
Tammy, on particularly this 2014 bond refunding, can we take that extra $1 million and place it towards principal, or are we locked into interest only in FY 2022?
Where are you?
I'm on 308, the bottom table. Debt service payments.
Okay, and what's your question?
Well, it looks like for FY 2022, we're making no principal reduction, paying interest only. Can we
Right.
take some of this money and apply towards principal, or are we locked into that payment schedule?
The 2014 bonds, let me look at this real quick, if you'll give me a second.
And you can get back to us if we don't have it right at our fingertips.
The 2014 bonds aren't callable until 2025. So I don't think we have an opportunity to make an advance payment on that.
Okay.
And that was a segue into a discussion about the debt service. You can see from this chart that we still have several years of public safety sales tax debt service payments. In fiscal year 2022, the 1999 bonds will mature. However, in fiscal year 2023, the principal payments will kick in on the 2014 bonds. So there's really just not much savings there from paying off the 1999 bonds. And as I mentioned earlier, in 2025, the 2014 bonds are callable. Those are presently, we're paying 5% interest rate on that. So we may want to look at a refunding of that bond when we have that option. And actually, I talked to Raymond James about that last week. So that's also on their radar. The 2016 bonds will mature in 2027. And then in 2014, in 2028, the 2014 bonds will mature, and we will have all the debt service paid off at the beginning of fiscal year 2029.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
I just want to point out that while I think it'll be possible to deal with the situation at the jail without having to go to referendum, or at least that's my hope, I don't think it'll be possible without issuing debt. And so one of the things I think that we need to, as we're looking at retiring bonds and all of that kind of thing, is what kind of capital do we want to keep on the table in order to facilitate that, you know what I mean, in the best way possible. And to that end, one of the things I'm hoping is that, sort of answer your question, I think that even if it was allowable, I think we'd want to have a conversation with our bond counsel on, what would it look like if we did that versus what would it look like if we kept money set aside for debt payment, that kind of thing. So I think one of the things that we've talked about is getting, as the committee on the jail is working out the logistics of what they're going to do in terms of facility and service, we also need to have a conversation about funding, and to that end, bringing in Raymond James to sort of advise us, because our fiscal landscape is really different than it was the last time they were in here. And I'm hoping that some of the money that the board has in that staffing line that we don't use could be used towards that on a contractual service basis. But I think, Jim, your question was good, but I think we also just have to think about it in terms of, like, where's the line of retiring debt and versus, issuing debt and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to make our payments and everything. I don't know where, that's why we have to bring in somebody that's not, anyone in this room to advise us on it.
Moving to the Capital Asset Replacement Fund, this slide is reflective of revenue, which for capital is, except for interest, interfund transfers. And the largest interfund transfers come from public safety sales tax and the general fund, and they are for software, security, equipment, And technology, and as I mentioned last night, in 22, we have a $3.75 million transfer that's going to be coming from the general fund that will be set in reserve in the county board's capital budget and appropriated for whatever it is determined that is best to be used for. The other transfers from the other funds are for ERP software cost allocation. For expenditures, some of the things that we are going to be paying for in fiscal year 2022 are software security, licensing, again, technology and equipment that is scheduled for replacement. There's quite a bit of software as a service that's budgeted in capital. Also budgeted is the facilities plan funding, which, as I stated last night, includes additional appropriation for a Brooklyn surveillance system. We are appropriating for network upgrades and phone system replacement, and again, the $3.75 million at this point to be determined.
I'm just going to say here too, in this particular situation, Stephanie asked the question earlier about the Board of Health expenses. Some of these expenses potentially could be ARPA expenses. We felt like we needed to put them in the budget regardless because we need to do them. But potentially, if your board is interested, depending on how you decide to spend the ARPA money, some of it might be able to be moved.
The IMRF fund is our next fund. In fiscal year 22, the preliminary IMRF rates reflect decreases. One of the things that I want to point out is that our ECHO contribution, which ECHO stands for Elected County Official, in fiscal year 22 is $163,000. We don't have any elected officials that are paying into this plan. However, there are 11 retirees that are on this plan. So the only contributions to the ECHO plan that are being made are from the county. In 2019, our Moody's credit rating cited that the county's pension was above average. The pension burden was above average. So one of the things that we are doing in the fiscal year 2022 budget is we are using levy capacity to make an additional contribution of $550,000 to the unfunded liability, and it will be directed to the ECHO fund, which has at this point a net pension liability of $1.5 million with the 2020 report. The nursing home fund still owes the IMRF fund $182,643, and the fiscal year 2021 budget includes a transfer for that balance to be paid off, and so we are projecting that we would remedy the amount owed to the IMRF fund from the nursing home in this fiscal year. For the Social Security Fund, the FICA rate remains stable. The increase in expenditure is related to wage increases, and this fund is also owed from the Nursing Home Fund $232,334. Again, we did budget in this fiscal year and are projecting that we will be paying that balance to this fund. The Tort Immunity Tax Fund is a levy fund, and this pays for the general fund's work comp, unemployment, and our share of the premiums and claims to the self-funded insurance fund. This fund has carried a negative fund balance for many years. It is in the same account as self-funded insurance. So the positive fund balance in self-funded insurance has offset the negative balance in the Tort Immunity Tax Fund. And we are recommending for fiscal year 2022 that the former nursing home levy be reallocated to tort immunity tax. And instead of transferring that levy amount to self-funded insurance as we did in fiscal year 2020, The recommendation is that the nursing home would be given credit for obligations owed to self-funded insurance, but that we would retain the levy dollars in tort immunity tax, giving us an opportunity to remedy that negative fund balance. The reason that this fund has continued to carry a negative fund balance for so many years is that the property tax levy growth is just insufficient to cover the increasing cost of this fund. We did make some headway in a 2 to 3 year period a few years ago, but then we were hit with a Carl property tax case ruling, and so, took another step backwards. But the Tort Immunity Tax Fund basically takes the brunt of any unallocated liability costs that are incurred by the county. And so it just needs a boost to be able to get out of its negative position. And so that is why we're making the recommendation for reallocation to this fund, giving credit to the nursing home for the obligations owed to self-funded insurance, but then not transferring that appropriation. That was a lot of information, so if I need to further explain, let me know. Okay, then we will move on to self-funded insurance. Again, revenue from this fund comes from tort immunity and also billing to other county funds to cover our liability, unemployment, work comp, and our stop-loss insurance premiums. One of the advantages to what I had just described about not making the transfer from tort immunity to self-funded insurance is that when we get our funds in a healthier position, particularly this self-funded insurance fund, we did do the levy reallocation in 2020 to self-funded insurance, and it really gave the fund balance a boost. There's still a pretty significant amount of obligations owed to self-funded insurance. But what we can do once we get self-funded and tort immunity in a good position where we're meeting our actuarial recommended fund balance and then also including a little bit of cushion is that we can reduce the billings to outside funds, still maintaining our actuarial recommended fund balance, but then also lessening the financial burden on the county's other funds. Other than the general fund, the self-funded insurance fund is the fund that carries the highest balance of financial obligations owed to the home, and that balance fluctuates. As you know, we just approved 3 settlement agreements, so those balances will be added to the obligations that are owed by the home, but hopefully we have an end in sight to that. And so for the nursing home fund, this fund was reclassified in fiscal year 2020 by the auditor's office as a special revenue fund as opposed to an enterprise fund. In fiscal year 22, we expect to receive the final distribution of the escrow holdback in the amount of $110,000. And presently, University Rehab, which is the new owner of the home, is undergoing an HFS audit, and that partially covers the period when the county owned the home from February 2017 until the sale date. So if you recall, the county had obligations to pay for the public aid pending or residents without payer sources for several months. And what happened is that we had to make those payments on a monthly basis, but then as payers were matched with payer sources, there was back pay paid that actually generated a credit owed back to the county for the PAP that we had paid. University Rehab has said that they are not going to be refunding the county for that PAP until the HFS audit is complete. The HFS audit at this point shows that the county could owe recoupments of up to $324,000. So, very much in excess of what University Rehab owes us. I've continued to stay in contact with University Rehab to gauge the status of the audit, but it's been very slow moving. In fact, it's been actually 2 years, I think, that since they initiated the audit. So the budget does not include the return of the $152,000 to the county, although it's possible we could get some of that back if University Rehab, who is advocating on our behalf and defending the recoupments, is successful. The one thing that I will say is that it is my understanding that it is not our responsibility, it is the new owner's responsibility to pay back any recoupments. So if there are recoupments in excess of this $152,000, University Rehab should not be able to come back to the county and demand payment for that.
Can I ask a question about the PAP? There isn't anybody left over there that the county's responsible for. Everybody's kind of shifted out.
We are
to the
done
PAP.
meeting our PAP obligations.
Okay, thank you.
And the last budget for tonight is the ARP budget. And so this basically, the budget that you see here includes the county commitments that have already been made and the receipt of the revenue. So we've already received $20 million in this fiscal year, and the second receipt of the disbursement is budgeted to be received next year. There's interest income budget in here that I have been provided estimates from the treasurer's office for, and the commitments are, as we've talked about already tonight, the transfer to the Mental Health Board and the contract with the Regional Planning Commission for project and fiscal management.
Kathy is also here tonight to talk about that. And you, basically, I'd like to refer you back to the front of your book where there's a memo from me and there's an attached spreadsheet that talks about the ARPA funding. So on that spreadsheet, you'll see the first 3 items are the items that Tammy just mentioned that are already committed by the board. And then the next section, which is about 12 items or 15 items, are things that were requested by the departments internally that you can see on the right-hand side. We've had some conversations so far with the board about different things, but some of the things are still pending. We haven't talked about some of them at all. So there's been no decision about what to include in ARPA at this point, but these are the actual budget requests from the departments for this year coming up. You can see what those are. The first 3 have to do with premium pay, which we've talked about quite a bit but not made a decision. And then the next ones have to do with various departments that are asking for other things. All of the items that are listed on here, except for the premium pay, would fall under the category of public health emergency. Kathy, do you want to talk about what that would include, what kinds of questions you'd have to answer in order to fit that category?
Yes, so public health emergency is any capital expenses or PPE or staff or services in response to the pandemic specifically. So any, for example, capital expenditures that are listed also fall under this category. What they've done for the reporting, they've actually taken public health emergency and put it into 3 categories. I suspect that the interim rule may reflect that when they finalize it. The public health category for reporting purposes has turned into public health, negative economic impacts, and services to disproportionately impacted communities. So at some point, I may modify this list to reflect what will show up in the reporting as a subcategory. But those uses, for example, equipment or capital expenditures that are helping to still provide public services in response to the pandemic and making things safer, and those adjustments needed are what qualifies under that category.
So it could be things with infrastructure in terms of, one of the things that's listed on here, I believe, is, let's see, updating the mobile command post for EMA. So that is directly related to the pandemic for health purposes. And so that could potentially qualify under that. Other things would be like IT that we need for increasing our broadband or Zoom licenses, things like that. So these are the requests that came for 2022. I also wanted to show you that some of the requests that you've been receiving, because a lot of you have been getting emails and memos from different departments the last several weeks, there are several things that were on our original list that I distributed to you guys that have been already taken care of, either in the regular budget. You've seen us as we've gone through that some of those things were included already in the regular budget, or potentially got paid for this year out of our 2021 budget. Or potentially also, the courts, for example, got a special grant from AIOC to pay for the video recording system in the courthouses. So I've put that list also on here that say are already included in the budget or paid for in other ways. And you can see what those are. If you feel like you want to transfer some of those over to ARPA, we could probably do that. The question that would come up with the board is how much do you want to take out of the ARPA money, and how much do you want to take out of the general fund money is what it would amount to. So I would be happy to entertain questions. There's not really this is not a very fleshed out budget yet because we haven't made a lot of the decisions, which I expect will take place in the next few weeks as we talk more about the ARPA things. If there's questions about it, I'm happy to answer those. Okay, so for next week, we have the two study sessions. The one on Monday is community violence. The one on Tuesday is affordable housing. Those will be held on Zoom. The one after that will be the rural water type projects. Will be before the ELEC meeting, for about an hour before the ELEC meeting. And then at that point, we'll be back to the committee of the whole for September. And so potentially we could have some discussion. I think at that point, I'm supposed to give you an actual tentative budget to look at and move forward with the board. And I'll be done with it at that point, unless you direct some change to occur. So I'll prepare for that. Questions that were brought up during the board meeting. I know a couple of you mentioned certain things that you thought you might want to include in the budget. I'll put those in the memo so that you don't forget to do them, to vote on them or decide if you want them in or out. Because I really think those require a board vote to decide to put them in, not just one person saying it. Any other questions? Discussion on anything that's been presented in the last 2 nights regarding the budget? Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.